the time lined up in a way where I could really see what that was going to become. She was Gordon Ramsay's right-hand woman for 15 years. Like, she's at the highest level. I said to her, listen, I think this is what this could be. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm driven by right now. I want to do it for you if you'll let me for free. And she said, okay, let's give it a go. Because I was coming from the chef space as well. She was, you know, like a hero to me, you know, at the highest caliber as a chef. So it wasn't just like some other media person coming in that didn't really know who she was, in a sense. Like, she was already at a high level for me, so I felt like I didn't have time to be shit. I had to get really good really fast.
Yeah.
That's where that passion turned into obsession. And that's when I just went all in.
Meet Nathan Sno, the CEO of Food Story Media, a pioneer in food marketing, helping top brands, restaurants and chefs bring their culinary visions to life. From Michelin star restaurants to viral food campaigns, Nathan and his team have mastered the art of making food look as good as it tastes. We're diving into the secrets behind building a powerful brand in the food industry, the future of food content, and the biggest lessons he's learned along the way. So whether you're a foodie, a content creator, or an entrepreneur looking for inspiration, this is the episode for you. Prepare to be inspired by Nathan's story. So grab a cup of coffee, grab a cup of tea, or whatever you fancy, because you're watching the official Young Humbler podcast. My name is Michael Burgess, and we present to you Mr. Nathan Sno.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I'm an entrepreneur and CEO of Food Story Media, and I can't wait to share a bit of my story with you.
Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
How was the trip down?
Good. It was not too far, thankfully. Although traffic, I did not anticipate that.
Hills was pretty mental, isn't it?
Yeah, as soon as I got on the one road, it was just chock-a-block. I was like, fuck. It's like the one time I've ever left early too, so thankfully I got here in time.
Well, I actually wanted to come down early, sort of prep, because I know how busy you are. And thanks for being here. And I know you've got a flight later on tonight. So
story of my life.
So you actually grew up in Northern Ireland.
Yep.
And now you travel all over the world. Something I actually am very inspired by, because I see your content online and I'm thinking, wow, like, I would love to do that. I understand there is challenges with that as well. But I'm personally pretty inspired by it. So that's why I wanted sort of you on the podcast and to get talking to you, mate. But what was life like for you growing up here in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I grew up in two places really, because my parents were separated. So my mum was from Lisburn, dad's from Belfast. I guess it was one of contrasts in a sense. Lisburn, predominantly lived with my mum, grew up with my mum, and my dad, as I said, was in West Belfast, and Lisburn side was somewhat simple, quieter. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lisburn much. Where did you grow up?
Cumber,
okay.
Yeah. Not too far,
not too far away. But Lisburn, yeah, it was this kind of this contrast in the sense that Lisburn was a quiet life, and growing up where, you know, the times where you just used to run around and knock on your mates' doors to see who's coming out to play, and playing curbsy until the streetlights came on, and rolling around in your BMX like a G with like a tin can stuffed in the BMX, you know, so it sounds like a motorbike. Simple times, but good times. And at the weekends, I would have went to visit my dad in West Belfast, which was different. You know, it was such a strong sense of community, but also had a real edge to it too. The kind of thing that, like, it was great, but it was like a close, protected area where one foot in the wrong direction could have changed things drastically in your experience, and what you were seeing and what you were hearing, and all the things that were going on around you too. So yeah, Lisburn, it was that contrast idea of it, and great things from both sides of it for sure. But it was like this bit of guarded freedom in a sense around Lisburn, growing up, and you're thinking that you have the world, you know, you're in this world and you've got this freedom to go wherever you please, but really you're in this guarded sense of three familiar streets that you go and you're playing, and you go home when the streetlights come on, kind of thing.
Yeah.
but a lot of fun with it too. Do you know? A lot of lessons learned over that time, and it's like, yeah, my dad's universe was there very different. It was he lived in West Belfast until I was about maybe young teenager, and then he moved up to Lisburn. But like there was different times then. Obviously, that was coming off the back of the whole Troubles and all that stuff. So there was still a lot of that tension there for sure. Certainly in that part where he was from in Suffolk and in that area.
Because whenever I see you as like a successful businessman who is doing really well. Is there anything that sort of happened in your early childhood that made you essentially?
Many things.
That you can talk about on the podcast.
Yeah, many things. Yeah, I mean, from there's multiple things I'll touch on. One was that first kind of period around then. If we're looking at that era of real young childhood, I remember when I was about I think I was about 10 years old, and I was at my dad's at the weekend, and I'd playing in the streets, and I was just outside his house, his flat they had, and playing in the streets, and a bunch of lads came walking by, and I'd seen them around before. They were a bit older, and they came walking up and just started chit-chatting away and whatever, and I was standing there, and one said, "Just hold your hand out," and he put a gun in my hand, and I was 10 years old. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Part excitement, like, oh, this is a gun and cool and whatever. Part of me was like, holy shit. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. I was just in shock in a sense. And my dad must have seen them walking out, because like within a moment he came running out of the house, running over and like kind of de-escalated the situation without me really knowing what was going on, and sent them on their way, and that was that. But that was the real kind of first crack in the facade of this idyllic, quiet childhood in a sense, where I realized that we're all kind of born into this inherited world that we didn't create, and as a result of that, you really have two options in life. One is that you conform to the expectations of what you're surrounded by, and the alternative to that is that you realize that you have the ability to intercept that and change the course of that direction. And still, as a 10-year-old, like, my thought wasn't quite as profound as that at that time, but it was definitely an eye opener of, okay, there is always going to be two paths. There's always going to be options in life where one decision can lead you somewhere completely different. So that realization at that time, and my dad being able to, enlighten me in these kinds of things as a kid, definitely opened up my eyes to the future of that.
What was your dream back then?
What was my dream back then? I was obviously in the food world now, and that definitely was always, there was always a seed there.
Just that wee bit of intrigue or interest. Yeah.
And I think that it comes mostly from my mum's side. My mum was a cook herself, and family was always important, and food was always important, and from both sides. And I sense in a way, but my mum's side is where the cooking stuff came from. So I was always, she was working a lot, and I cooked a lot myself as a kid. I was like, she cooked a lot, and I was like, well, what's going on there? Can I get involved and whatever? Being an absolute nuisance, no doubt. But I was always really keen to know what she was doing and to be able to help out and get involved with it. And like when people came for dinner, I was like, oh, I want to help do this, and I want to cook that. Yeah. And I want to say I done this,
Yeah.
So that forced that intrigue in a way. And I definitely had an element of natural skill with it. And so I started playing around with that, cooking for people. And I used to have, my dad saw that. I used to watch TV on a Saturday with Jamie Oliver, whatever it was called, the show that he used to play on a Saturday, and I watched it every weekend at my dad's house.
Yeah.
And so he saw that, and then he made this game called Restaurant 7 when I was a kid, and it was all about me, him, and his wife, my stepmom, at the time used to cook for each other and score each other, and it was this competitive kind of little game where we used to rate each other's dinners. You know, it was a lot of fun. So that's probably where it started. That element of intrigue in the food world. But
did you head on into London then, or what was it?
Yeah. So where that went from there, everyone was telling me you should be a chef. You should be a chef. You should go and do this and blah blah blah. And me being a rebellious teenager, I'm like, no, I'll do what I want. I'm not doing what you tell me to do, even though I'm good at it and probably should. I'm not going to do that. So I went off and studied business because I always knew that I wanted to have a business. I don't even know really what that meant at that time, probably, but I liked the idea of how it sounded.
Yeah.
And so I figured if I do this business thing, at least I'm bound to learn something that's going to lend well to me in the future. So I went and studied that. Dropped out after a year because I couldn't handle the coursework side of it. I was never academic in any capacity. Street smart, knew what I wanted, knew that I was going to do something, but
just wasn't sure what.
And was never like the paperwork, the academic side. It didn't click with me. I was a creative. I am a creative, and so from that, I then came away, studied music. Because I used to DJ as well as when I was growing up, and I went through this phase of just having like house parties and had decks and used to have these wild parties in my house and DJ for a while. I was like, okay, what can I do with this? So I went and studied music. And through this whole period, I was still cooking and involved in that and working as a chef in different places. But at that point, I was like, right, okay, I'm probably not going to be a world famous DJ. So let me go do this cooking thing.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided to go back to college, studied professional cookery, and then took off. And I think what age was I? Yeah, I guess I was about 16, I suppose, 17, 18. I would have been about 17 or 18 when I went to study cooking.
Was it in Belfast?
In Lisburn, in Cirque, Lisburn.
Oh, yeah.
In tech, yeah. That was an experience. And it was, those years as well, you're wild. That was prime teenage years. In a time, between that, like that rebellious period I'm talking about, between the ages of probably 15, 16 to 21 was a pretty chaotic loop of wildness, like of drugs and alcohol and not so great influences.
Can I ask you a question there?
Sure.
You said something really interesting about picking your path. What made you go down the route you're going down now, and not necessarily the route of the drugs and the partying and the drink and getting involved with the wrong people? Because I've seen that, and that's what's sort of interesting me, because your life is nearly like a fork in the road or a crossroads.
Very much so. I think that, around that period, in that age, in that era of time, you don't necessarily, you don't choose who you grow up with. It just happens. You don't really make the decisions about which school you go to, which area you grow up in. All of those things are already decided for you by parents or whoever makes those decisions. So you just fall into that. And so I grew up in that place, and I had, definitely had some great friends, and I don't think that people are ever their behaviors. I think that we surround ourselves with great people no matter what. Like at the root of who they are, sometimes they don't have great behaviors or influences on us.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that was the situation at that time. I, still talk to a couple, like maybe one or two of those guys from back in that time, and one of them is still like a brother, but we're completely different people. And so at that time for me, I was growing up around that, and I think we're all driven by the same 5 human needs, one being significance. In particular, at that time when you're a young adult, a lot of young males in particular are driven by a sense of significance. How do I get significance in this time? In this environment? And one of the biggest ways in that in that place is like who is the wildest, who drinks the most, does the most drugs, or gets into fights and all that stuff, because that creates that sense of significance. Which is a really hollow game of empty trophies, and it's kind of masquerading as being somebody, but it's not at all in any capacity. Quite the opposite. And so in that time, I was started to see the cracks around that, the chasms that were people committing suicide, people becoming homeless addicts, people going to prison, all of these things that were starting to happen as we got a bit older and doing this for a few years. You know, you're getting into your 18s, 19s, 20s, and you see this happening. And while I was a part of that, I always still had this kind of underlying beat and rhythm somewhere in there that saw and desired something more than that. I didn't want that for my life. As much as it was fun and exciting and adventurous and all that stuff, there was still something that was like, I can't see myself there in the future. I think there's something else. And that's a really, really hard point to leave. That's a really, really hard point to leave. And I think that's actually the reason why most people don't change on whatever it is in life. I think the biggest reason people don't change is because in order to do that, in order to become who you're really meant to be, you have to be willing to let go of who you used to be. And so for me, that was a pinnacle moment where I decided, and I knew that staying where I was going to be more painful than where I was going. And so I decided in that time that I needed to leave. I couldn't simply just not hang around these people anymore, because it's where I grew up. I didn't live on my own. I lived with my mum, and that's where I was, and these were the people around me. So it was a really difficult time where I decided I needed to actually leave, not these people or behaviors or habits or places. I needed to leave the fucking country.
And you knew that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was 19 at that time, and I decided to leave. I took out a $3,000 loan from the credit union, and I left and moved to Australia. Didn't know anybody, didn't know anything, didn't know anywhere, on my own. Yeah,
that's a big risk, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is, because you're like packing all this in this and leaving this sense of belonging, of community, of significance, and all those things that that sense of comfort.
Yeah.
On this kind of whisper of belief that there might be something else more, but you don't know. You never know. It is that risk, but it's the risk that I think was, of course, now looking back, absolutely fundamental and necessary.
What was the plan whenever you went over?
There wasn't one.
There
wasn't a plan. It was there was no plan. I said, like, let me just go and figure this out. I don't know what there's going to be there, but Australia sounds like a cool place. It's sunny. It's probably the farthest away that I could possibly be.
Yeah.
So at least let's see what happens, because it's, home's always going to be here. I know what's going on here. I've got, the network. If I need to come back, I can come back. Mum's store is always open, and bless her for that she'll always let me come back if and when I ever needed to. So went there without a plan, really. And it was the best thing I ever done. Like, that was the start of the rest of my life. That moment was the moment that changed the course completely.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a slight pivot or change of decision. It was a 360-degree redirect. Yeah.
And then did you get involved with the kitchens and becoming a chef, or what way?
Yeah, so I was a chef even before I'd left, and and it was a period where I was I loved work, and I was passionate about what I was doing massively, but I wasn't so career driven. I was passionate about what I'd done, but it wasn't like I must become successful. I was really going off in search of myself in that season, and looking for life experience and life adventure. Like, adventure's a big part of me. Like, I love that idea, and it was this whole exploration of the unknown, the uncertain, and figuring that out along the way. So I was cooking and I was working, but it was for the purpose of adventure and exploration, and getting to go to new places and meet new people and all that stuff along the way. it wasn't until like kind of much later that I started taking cooking extremely seriously.
I was just about to ask you, what's your biggest risk? But I feel like that's probably it, is it?
That probably is the biggest risk. Yeah.
That's paid off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you've got to be willing to make that, like, ultimately.
Even as a business owner, you know, having that ingrained in you, nearly being like, instead of being never going away, still being here, essentially, and never knowing what's beyond, essentially.
Yeah. You know? As I've grown older, it's definitely about minimizing risk, but not being afraid of it, you know?
How do you minimize it?
You ask the questions now. You ask the questions. How can I minimize this risk? What is the potential things that could go wrong, and how can I remove that as much as I possibly can? And obviously, you're never going to remove it entirely. That's not possible. There is always an element of risk with every single thing we do. Walking out in the streets in the afternoon, going for lunch, there's a risk, you know what I mean? You're going to get hit by a car, potentially, it happens.
Yeah.
But it's like minimizing that. Okay, I'm going to stay on the footpath, you know, or I'm going to bring an umbrella because there's a risk it might rain, you know, minimize the risk.
Yeah.
But like, don't be afraid of it. You're not going to otherwise you'd stay in the same four walls for the rest of your life. So everybody does take risks. It's just the capacity of what they are change, you know. Some people it's never the reality of it neither. It's a perceived risk. I think that's strongly driven by your views on it as well. Like, if you think that something will happen, it probably will.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in manifestation of things. Like, you know, if you're committed and staying optimistic towards something, there's a strong sense that that'll be leaning on your side too.
How did you get into manifesting, or is it something that came randomly, or?
Yeah, it's a long story, that. So I think it all comes in this like umbrella of personal development, and how I got into that. I guess the door that opened that was subconsciously my dad. When I was a kid, he, you know, came from this previous life, also had a life of extreme contrast, that grew up in the Troubles and surrounded by that and all the rest, and then started getting into community development and working with two sides, you know, the two religions, and kind of peace building and mediating through that. And in that season of his life, he got into the world of personal development and psychology. And he went off to learn something called NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Are you ever familiar with that?
No.
Ever heard of it?
No.
So it's essentially just understanding like language patterns and so on. So that it's about understanding how you communicate both with yourself and with the world.
Yeah.
So he went off to learn that. I remember that period. It was in California. That's where it was started and founded, and in a place called Santa Cruz, I believe. And I remember that time when he was coming back and like kind of practicing with me. And I'm a very self-aware person, so I kind of like, I knew, I was like, Dad, shut up and stop trying to use that shit on me. Like, I'll do what I want. Stop trying to influence my decisions. And I just really blocked it off for that time. But I remember very clearly that the time when he went off to learn that. And then he came back, and once he developed that skill, he went off to do the same thing around the world and work with in many of the places that have had wars all over the world, and using these skills to bring people together and connect and help them overcome challenges and different values and belief systems and all that stuff. So that was subconsciously going in, that I wasn't aware of that really until much later, when I went through, you know, my own shit, my own stuff at that time that was challenging and dark and hard, and this like little moment then that opened that and kind of revisited that whole thing was when in that kind of real darkest moment, I was like, I didn't have anybody around me. I didn't have any role models. I didn't have any, you know, particularly fantastic friends that were a good influence. So it was like that point where I'm like, you know, where do I even turn here? And I remember just watching a video, and it was a Tony Robbins video. I can't remember what I typed into YouTube, like motivation or something, I don't know what, and this came up, or maybe it just came up in the feed, And I watched it, and I knew who he was anyway because my dad had one of his books, and I always seen it around, Awaken the Giant Within. And I watched this video, and I was like, okay, I needed to hear that. And next day I watched another one, and another one, and another one. And I think for a period of like 3 years, I was like consuming this content every day, throughout the day, through different periods of the day. And that sparked this whole kind of new beginning and interest and intrigue of that whole world. And the idea that you are actually absolutely in control of your life. And that forced me to dive into that a lot more. And I remembered that he had done this work, and all these things were like connecting, that the stuff that I was consuming, the content about psychology and personal development, was all making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, that's what he was talking about then.
Yeah.
And that's what he was doing
Connecting
then.
the dots nearly,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. Is there anyone you listen to now, or you did, other than Tony? Is there anyone you listen to? Reason being is because I know myself, and Ross Knoll's big into manifesting. And like say Bob Proctor, or Alan Gale, Napoleon Hill, all them types of individuals who I listen to. But
I mean, I think there's many greats, and you know, I've listened to those guys as well. I think that there's an umbrella of that there's a baseline that all of them are connected to, and it's that idea of that you being in control of it. He was probably the main one, and still is, that I listen to. I'm very invested in that. Like, I go away 2 or 3 times a year to his seminars all over the world, and I'm in that network and in that community. So that works for me. I don't necessarily need any others. Like maybe a bit of Joe Dispenza if I was going to choose anyone. I think he's very, very interesting, and it comes from an interesting place because it's like science backed, but also very spiritual and fascinating, his perspective on it too. But yeah, that's the kind of world that I'm in, and completely changed the course for me, for sure.
Yeah.
And Tony Robbins is, full on and extreme for many people, and he was and still is for me.
Yeah.
Like I'm from Lisburn, Belfast. Like he's still like, holy fuck, this guy's way too American and dramatic and all that stuff.
So loud and
and all that. But still, there's something like rooted in it. I think it's because of that time, whenever I was in that place, that I needed to hear it. That's what opened the door for me. So I respect that, I honor that, and there's been only great things that have come of that. Like, I've met some of the most incredible people in the world through that network. I've excelled drastically since I've opened that door. And it's just I get a lot from it. One of the number one things I get from it is accountability. Because when I go to these things, there's an expectation from that community, and as a result from myself, that I need to be in a better place, that I need to be at the next step, because you've committed to a decision or a thing that you're going to do, and people are going to ask you, did you do that thing? Did you get that thing? Or where are you now? So there's this sense of wanting and desiring to be at a new place, at a better place than where you are, which is kind of like this sense of, people talk about peer pressure. I think peer pressure is a good thing. The peers are the problem, not the pressure. So it's just about surrounding yourself with the right people that put the right pressure on you. It's not the pressure, because pressure is a good thing if it's used in the right way. And what that does is give me this positive sense of pressure that I want to be better. It's that accountability, because when you're working for yourself, you don't have anyone to answer to,
Yeah.
So it's very easy to not do the thing.
Yeah. No, I get
just say it, to do it.
I would love to touch on your business, if that's okay.
Sure.
I've actually got a quote of yours just before we get into that from the 3rd of June 2023.
Right.
Because I was doing a wee bit of research,
Yes.
and I was like, you know what, I would love to read this back to you. And you essentially say here, 5 years ago they told me to stay in my lane. I didn't know what I was going to do. It's not going to work. You're wasting your time. The list goes on. We've now had 200,000 followers yesterday, and I share that not to boast, but as a reminder that the only opinion that matters is the one we forge for ourselves. Whenever I was looking into you and doing wee research and things, something like that really stood out to me, because I was like, wow, like even hearing that is inspiring to me, because I feel like I could probably relate a wee bit. Where did your journey begin with the business you're in now?
Yeah. I appreciate you reading that. It's a great reminder as well to myself. I think we often forget about these things on social media. It's such a little like portfolio of life of the different seasons we go through.
Yeah.
So that brings back a lot of memories. I think it was about 2016 when I started officially Food Story Media, and this was a time where I was playing around with social media off the back of a comment from a girlfriend at the time who was a makeup influencer. And she was like, Nathan, you should start a chef social media account. It's like, whatever, I'm busy cooking here, leave me alone. But then I was like, oh, she was doing super well. She had a lot of followers at the time. I was like, oh, that's interesting. This was a time where no one really had social media, just these like ultra influencer people. No business had it or anything like that. So it was still in an early time of it. And I thought, okay, let me have a go at this and I'll do it. Parallel to that, I also had this sense of frustration. When I was in the kitchen, I always used to see media and stuff coming in. I worked in some pretty decent kitchens, so I seen media coming in relatively frequently, asking the chef to, show the plate of food and, smile for the camera and stuff. And there was this kind of one time, I guess, was a trigger for the rest of what happened when a guy came in, a photographer came in and asked a chef to toss some flames in a pan. Those shots you see everywhere that there's just flames in a pan and the chef's shaking it?
Yeah.
That's actually bullshit. Like, that's not meant to happen. If there's flames in your pan, the food's burning. And I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. That's not accurate. That is not, you're not capturing the soul of what's going on here. That's not correct. And if no one else can tell this story, I'm going to. So I started documenting and playing with cameras and sharing what I was doing as a chef at the time. And it wasn't so much about plates of food. It was other things. It was like the process of the craft. And that's when I was still in Belfast. And then I moved to London, which was a whole different ocean. It was a whole different ocean altogether. And that was the time in that season where I was very committed to career. I was working in Michelin star kitchens, everything from cafes in Australia to working in 23 Michelin star restaurants all over the world, working alongside some of the greatest chefs of our time. And that was an extremely inspiring stage of my life that I was so passionate and so driven by this. At that time, my eyes were open. I was just enthralled by this whole craft, the thrill of it, the intensity of it, the craft of it was just mesmerizing to me.
Pressure and
yeah. It was invigorating. Hard, very hard. But alongside this social media thing was happening at the same time, and I was like, dabbling in it, and I was curious about it, and people were starting to pay attention to it. And I at that time I was working in a restaurant for a short period with a chef called Claire Smith, and she kind of seen what I was doing on social media, and I asked her, can I take a few photographs and a few videos on my last day there? And she was kind of like, okay, but I don't really know how I feel about it. And so I did, and she started following me at that time, and fast forward a few months, I came back and said, do you want to do this again? And she was like, yeah, you considered maybe doing something like this? I was like, well, yeah, I have. And she said, well, I think you should. I said, okay, chef, maybe I will.
Yeah.
And I did. And at the time I was, still working full time as a chef. But in any available free time, the small amount that I did have, I was going to do this at other restaurants and stuff. And so the gateway, there was no one really doing this. There was one company network in the food space that was kind of doing something that I might want to do. And so I thought the gateway to that might be to reach out to them and see if I could work with them or work for them. And so I reached out to the founder, the owner of the company, had a conversation on the phone one day, and one of the first things he said was, what equipment do you use? And obviously I'm starting out, I've barely got enough money to pay rent, let alone buy expensive equipment. So I told him about my little camera and what I could do with it and all that stuff. And the first thing he said was, it's not good enough. we work with professional videographers and all this spiel. And I remember just thinking, shit, it was embarrassing in a sense, you know, felt small and like questioning, is this really the right thing? Should I just be in the kitchen and don't be bothering with this stuff? But there was this like whisper that I couldn't ignore anymore, that was driven by that sense of frustration of people not really understanding what we've done in the industry, didn't understand the craft, because for me it wasn't about the plate of food, it was about everything that came before it. And I knew that I had a sense of responsibility to tell that, because I was the only one who understood it more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And so I said, fuck this guy, I'm going to start it myself, I'm going to do it myself. Mm-hmm. And so that's how Food Story Media was born. It was this sense of, screw you, I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to do it better, because you think it's about the tool when it's not. Mm-hmm. And that's the point. It's never about the tool, it's about the perspective. And
you're telling that story as...
Yeah, because that's what it was about, because I understood what they didn't. I understood the story because I'd stood shoulder to shoulder with these people. I'd worked the 100-hour weeks. I'd committed the sacrifice, the challenge, the hardship that comes with anything at a high level. And so there was that sense of responsibility that I felt that I had to tell that story. And that was hard too, because going back to that season was a big thing, because there's two completely different things. One being a chef and one being a creator, which eventually led to a digital marketer and a company. But those are completely different games altogether. Mm. The second I had absolutely no idea about whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I had to figure that out. I had to learn all that stuff. And it was an interesting time, because I'm leaving one place, one industry, one job to step into another, and that's an interesting time. And I call it my season of solitude, because it's like the time where you were no longer accepted in this previous identity, but you haven't built the credentials or achieved enough to be accepted by the new one that you're building.
That'd be grey area. Yeah.
So, there was times where like some chefs were seeing me as like a sellout playing around with cameras, and we're like, what are you doing messing around with the social media thing? You should be in the kitchen. And on the opposing side to that, in the media world, they were like, you don't belong here. Like, you're a chef, get back in your lane. So that was a quiet time, an uncomfortable time for sure.
What age were you when you were in that stage?
So that was like 2016. God, you're testing my maths here. What year is it? So like 9 years ago, like 22-ish.
Pretty young, yeah.
No, I was older than that. Let's say 20, 24, 25. Yeah, which is, it's still obviously young, and like to change your career completely is probably on the later side to do that from most people's perspective, perhaps. I've spent a whole life studying something, being obsessed by something. I really was. I never wanted to leave the industry. This whole thing wasn't driven by, I want to do something else. It was very organic. It happened. It was like a pull towards it that I felt that I had to do, that came out of nowhere, really.
Yeah. Do you nearly feel guided that you went down that way?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was instinct. And of course it was surrounded by fears, of judgment, which was happening, but it was instinct. There was still something inside, deeply rooted, that was like, you fucking have to do this. It's not a question. You have to do it. It's it's your mission. You're responsible to tell this story, because if you don't, no one else will.
Yeah. And then in what way did you go about getting your first client, second client, and beyond, really?
So going back to the part about where I was working for a chef called Claire Smith as a cook, and then having a conversation later with her, I saw the potential of what that could be. That was in the beginning stages of her restaurant Core, called Core by Claire Smith. It's a 3 Michelin star restaurant in London now. And that was at the very start and the opening of that restaurant. And it's this time lined up in a way where I could really see what that was going to become. I knew what they were capable of. She was Gordon Ramsay's right-hand woman for 15 years. She's at the highest level. I knew what that restaurant was going to become. I saw that. And I said to her, listen, I think this is what this could be. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm driven by right now. I'm going to do it for you. I want to do it for you if you'll let me for free.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, okay, let's give it a go. And like, I was shite at it. Like, I was diabolical, didn't know what I was doing. But I knew that I'd figure it out. You know, I'm very obsessive in that way, where if I want to learn something, I will do it. You know, I think if the reason's strong enough, you'll figure out the way to do it, you know. So I did that, and in that, because I was coming from the chef space as well, she was, you know, like a hero to me, you know, at the highest caliber as a chef. So it wasn't just like some other media person coming in that didn't really know who she was, in a sense. Like, she was already at a high level for me. So I felt like I didn't have time to be shit. I had to get really good, really fast.
Yeah.
So that's where that passion turned into obsession. And that's when I just went all in and was like, I need to learn really fast. How do I do this? You know, day after day, all hours of the day, every hour of the day, learning that craft and how to use a camera, how to figure out the lights and all that stuff that I was never really that interested in from a technical point of view, but I had to learn it to be able to do the other side, because it wasn't so much about the equipment, it was about what you can do with it, kind of thing. So, but equally, to do that, I needed to know that side. So there was a long period, you know, bless her for putting up with me through that season and making many mistakes and things just not working for a long time. But what I'm going back to that part about positive peer pressure, that's what that was. And she never put the pressure on me. I put the pressure on myself. In that sense.
Hit that standard.
Because I wanted to do well for them. That's what it was about. It was like, they're performing at their absolute best. I need to do the same from this side. And they trusted me because I had worked in their kitchen.
Yeah, the bond was already there.
The bond was there. There was an element of trust. No, it was blind trust, because, you know, she knew as well that I you know, didn't really know what I was doing. I was like at the very early stages of this, but that's when that started, because then it evolved and it won 2 Michelin stars, and then it won 3 Michelin stars, and we essentially built that entire brand on social media, documented everything, done all the photography, done all the videography, told all the stories of the restaurant, of her, of what the purpose was behind it, what their beliefs were about hospitality, about cooking and all that, which I helped define. That's, you know, what we do as a business is those 3 things. Number 1 is define the story. So working with them and pulling those things out. Everybody knows what it is, deeply rooted, but they need to be asked the right questions to pull it out of them.
It's so much more than just food, isn't it?
Yeah, massively.
Yeah. Food's only like 10% if even, you know.
Exactly. It really is. And it's like, at that point, there's almost like, it's a bit of a balance of like, it is food and cooking, but there's like such a craft to it. It's an art form in a sense too.
And then the people start seeing your work, and then
yeah, that's when it blew up. So whenever then Core started getting a lot of attention, so did we, parallel to that, because we were associated to it, and the power of brand association is extreme when you do it well.
And then did you grow your team then? Did you branch out and delegate?
Yeah. So it was, so on my own originally. My partner helped me at the time. She was, you know, she invested a lot too. And, you know, it was a tough season for sure for many reasons. But yeah, eventually evolved and got someone else doing some bits and pieces, and, you know, got another client and here, there and everywhere. And that started to evolve and build a small team. I done the creative side, like the photography and video for up until about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, maybe. And that's where that went from there. And then started, obviously we built it on social media. So obviously we had a skill set that was beyond just like content. It was understanding how social media worked, how digital marketing worked. And I was strongly driven by that as well, because it was a sense of psychology of how people understand and connect with things, the element of story and the element of how you deliver it. So I really got interested in that side, and that took me over there a little bit. And so I started teaching people how I used the camera and how I told the story through creative. and then built a relationship with a couple of great creators over that time that I now still work with. One of them is Ross, who's a dear friend too, and we've got a couple of guys that we work with now on a freelance basis, and have a team of 5 full time between editors and content managers and my EA and so on. Real strong team now that give us the freedom to do all of that. But the business has evolved as well a lot. So that was originally working with lots of independent restaurants and chefs. Now we still do that, but we work with more corporate clients as well, which gives us a lot more scope and working on much bigger projects and all that stuff too.
What would you consider a key or a couple of key factors of your own success in business? Is there something you sort of say, this is a reason, or?
I think 2 main ones. Number 1, resilience for sure. I think it's easy to start anything. It's easy to get going when the momentum's high and the excitement's there and everyone's like, yeah, you should do that. And starting all those things, there's so much buzz and energy around it that it's much easier at that stage. But then, things start to happen, things start to fall apart, the wheels come off sometimes, and you have to be able to change the tire. And resilience for sure would be number 1. And I think that, think back to the earlier times of Food Story Media, there was some roller coaster rides there for sure.
Yeah.
One of the times, maybe 6 months into it, I was living in this little flat in Hackney, and this is a place I could barely stand up in. I've got a video somewhere, and I could literally, like, my head touched the ceiling in half of the house. It was like this little, we call it the tree house. And I'm tall like yourself, and like half of it I could barely stand up in. It was wild. But in that time, our house got broken into.
Jesus. And
they stole all of my equipment, everything. And I could barely afford rent, never mind to buy this equipment in the first place.
Hackney?
In Hackney, yeah. Which is a cool up and coming place and very hipster and all the rest of it, but it also is like rough too. And in that same month, my house flooded. My washing machine pipe burst and the whole apartment flooded. Half of our furniture was ruined. And I remember that time because it was like, holy shit, this is like the wheels are falling off here. That's what's happening here. Everything's falling down around me. And that's when that resilience thing comes in. That's the times when you either stop or you keep going, and I think that's really driven by your reasons. I would say your resilience is fueled by your reasons, and you have to be so clear on why you're doing it. Beyond anything else, it's why you're doing it. That's what really keeps you going. It's being driven by something bigger than yourself.
Yeah,
and I really was at that time. And off the back of that, I ended up getting an extra job cooking like burgers at the weekends in this like little random place in Hackney, which was hard for many reasons. One being like I was a quote unquote Michelin trained star chef, so there was a pride thing involved. Like, do I want to be going to do that? It's kind of going backwards, and also I'm trying to build my dreams here. Is this taking me away from that? But I had to do it because I couldn't afford to fund this dream further without having some sort of income. I had to replace this equipment. So I was doing that to afford it. And I remember I had to build it back on the bare bones. I didn't have any like fancy cases or anything like that. So I was walking around London with all this equipment stuffed into like backpacks and like supermarket bags, walking around London like a donkey.
Did you ever feel like giving up at that time?
Definitely crossed my mind. Definitely crossed my mind. There was, of course, periods throughout several years where the thought crossed my mind, like,
should I be doing this?
Should I be doing this?
Yeah.
Not even should I be doing this. I knew that I should be doing it. Can I do this? Like, can I do this? Do I have the capacity to do this? And that's where that resilience thing comes back in of knowing the reason, like that it's beyond me, that I have. It's not only just doing it for me. I'm doing it for a whole an industry here. This is necessary. It has to happen. It's not a question of how it happens. Like that, we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Find the way. And so
The desire was there,
yeah,
wasn't it? Yeah.
absolutely. But yeah, equally very, very hard. I think in life you always have 1,000 reasons to stop doing it, you know, but if you have one, you only need one. You only need really one reason to do it if it's strong enough and if it's deeply connected to who you are and who your mission is. I think ultimately that's what pulls us through. So not doing it, not making sure you're not doing it for the applause or the recognition, but for a higher purpose.
Did you always feel like you had that essentially inside you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For Food Story Media.
Yeah.
Not for the cooking side. Like I loved it, extremely passionate about it. I still love it and extremely passionate about it. But I didn't have a particular mission beyond that, where as Food Story Media, I did.
What about, and I understand, like, you're constantly traveling and moving around the world and talking to different people. I'm sure every day is not the same, but if you were sort of to describe, like, a usual day for you, what would that look like?
Usual day. I wish I had a usual day.
Or say,
Yeah,
even
when I'm in the
Mondays
same place?
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously my schedule changes and I'm in, you know, many countries throughout the year, never staying in the same place longer than 3 weeks, living out of a suitcase. But whenever I am in the place, I do definitely have habits and rituals that keep me aligned, that keep me in check, for sure.
Yeah.
Number one is health. So, like, that's what comes at the forefront. So there's some non-negotiables like fitness, for sure. Fitness and personal development are at the core, ultimately, of everything I do, and I had to figure that out. If that's not right for me, if my health is not right, if my fitness is not right, if my mental state is not right, nothing else is right.
Yeah, no, I got that. Yeah, yeah.
And it's like your core, your stock, as I call it. Like in the kitchen, we have this reference of like the stock pot is the center of a kitchen. It's like really the hub because there's so many other things that come from it. And I always talk about that. This is like your stock, looking after that, making sure you're very careful what goes into it and who's around it and all those things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, a typical day, like I wake up at 6:30, I take 15 minutes. It's nothing overwhelming. I went through the periods of, you know, having these endless lists of wellness activities and things that I need to do before I start the day. And while I think it's great to explore that and do all that, I don't think it's necessary. And I think that it sometimes creates this illusion that that's productive, that it's not always. I think there's definitely a commitment to committing some time to yourself before you do anything else. And I'll take 15 minutes now. I'll wake up, I'll drink some lemon water just to get pH levels balanced and helps with digestion before I drink a coffee. And after I drink some lemon water, I'll sit and have a quiet moment. Call it meditation, call it a moment of silence, whatever you want. But I'll sit for 10 minutes. Like, that's my commitment. Any more than that's a bonus, but I'll take 10 minutes and just sit in silence, have a moment before the day begins, set some intentions. I'll have a coffee and then I'll get going. And that's the start of the day. And then I'll check in with myself of what I have planned. Every day is always planned in advance. That's been a skill set that's been developed for sure. I'm now at a point where my year is planned in advance. That wasn't always like that, but probably the last two have been the first ever. This one, much more than the rest. But that idea of making sure that you already know what you're going into before you start it. So I'll just check in with that again, and then I'll check in with my team and make sure everyone else is on the same page and we're moving in the same direction with each other. And then I'll get going. Every day I'll train 5 or 6 days a week. Different things, maybe the gym. I go to multiple different gyms.
Always on the move, yeah.
Yeah, I'm I wish I had like a world gym membership. Spend way too much on gyms, but yeah, could be in a gym, could be at like a CrossFit thing. I do some hot yoga as well. Lots of stuff that just keeps me balanced. I run a bit too. Is really good for just like stepping away, detoxing from the digital space and just getting some clarity in your mind.
Yeah, get the mental in check nearly.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you not get running the business and keeping your team right and there's so much pressure goes into that. How do you keep your mental in check, or how do you keep focused?
Great question. It definitely comes back to that health thing. Like, that's the fundamental of it all, is making sure that that's right, for sure. And the ways I do that is making it non-negotiable. So I figured that out maybe 4 years ago, when I wasn't healthy physically or mentally, and nothing else was going right, because it was just constantly this pull back that came back to that. You know, I was getting tired and frustrated and easy to anger and all those things that were fundamentally based upon myself, not the things that were going around me, because we're never in a place of it's never a place of the experiences, but how we respond to them, right? So that was driven by who I was, what my health was, what my mentality was, and I just managed to get to this place because I was so committed to just work. But I think there's a misillusion that work is only professional. There's a lot of work that is personal, and you need to know that, and you need to be very aware of that sometimes the work that you need to do most is on you and yourself. And so that flipped a switch at that point, where I realized how important that was to everything in my professional life. And so now I commit to going away at least two to three times a year to these seminars or programs. I commit absolutely non-negotiably to training 5 to 6 days a week in those different things, and making sure that they're mixed and they're changed, and ultimately protecting my stock and making sure that the right people are around it. That's the biggest thing. Making sure that the influences around me are the right ones. You know, I have a very small circle of people that I spend time with now, some of which that I don't even get to spend physical time with. It's digital, you know, but it's still an element of influence.
I think that's what you said there was super interesting, like keeping your circle small. And it's something actually our last couple of even guests have said, which I find pretty fascinating. Like, you would think people who are online and have this presence have loads of people, but if you actually look into it, there's only a real handful of people there that they need, essentially, isn't it?
For sure. And that you have the capacity for. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so much stronger having, like, you don't need 1,000 people. You need 3 mothers that you can count on.
Yeah.
You can call up at any time of day and say, I need you here. And they won't ask any questions. They'll just show up and they'll be there for you no matter what, any time of day. And that's what you need in life, is not this idyllic sense of knowing everybody or being ultra popular or whatever it is, because that is an illusion. It really is an illusion, and it's not the same thing as just having great people, and that's a very different place, that you know you can count on someone to be there when you need them to, and vice versa. And being able to be there for someone else at the same time. So I maybe have like 3 people that I speak to continuously.
And that's worth 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? In a weird roundabout way.
It is, for sure.
It's quality over quantity, isn't it?
Definitely.
There's one thing actually, I hear this all the time, and people always say to me about how they struggle to find like their thing. Like, I feel like you sort of stumbled across that thing and you felt guided. I kind of felt guided in my thing. If someone hasn't found their thing, is there any advice you have, and they're maybe not sure what they want to do or where they want to go?
Finding your thing. Yeah. I think that you have to follow your curiosity, for sure. And sometimes that's very quiet and maybe scary, because you have those other fears of, you know, what is this person going to think about me if I try that thing? Or what is this existing identity that I've built in this environment going to think if I try this thing? Going back to the place where I was talking about when I was changing mine, I think a lot of it is around that. I think you have to be willing to lean into your curiosity and explore what excites you. And to do that, you have to know what excites you and what's important to you and what your values are. And you need to ask yourself, what is important to me? Not what are the activities that are important to me. What are the outcomes that are important to me? Because I think that's one of our biggest life compasses is knowing what's important to us, because that is really drives all other decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people don't start with that. They ask, what do I want to do? You know? And this is like kind of reverse engineering that in the sense of firstly starting, well, what's important to you? What do you want to feel?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to create around that? Because that's where it comes from ultimately. There's no point going down something because it's shiny and it looks cool and fun if it's not really going to give you the return of one of your biggest values.
Yeah.
So definitely that. Explore, follow your intuition. Don't be afraid to question yourself and ask yourself what's important to me.
Would you, just down to our last two, but would you class yourself as successful?
Great question. No. And I don't know if I ever will as such. Have I achieved things that I'm proud of? Yes, for sure.
Do you think success to you is something that's always on the horizon because you're always growing and changing?
There's two ways about it. Like, there's two ways I perceive, I guess, success. One, and it's an interesting time because I think it's changed for sure. Like that initial answer that I gave you was probably my old one of this idea of success being a place or a point that it's reached. And I don't think I've got to that place, but I also think that that's always evolving and always moving and always going to be ahead of me, and I don't think I'll ever reach it because it always changes.
Yeah.
And while there's been points where I've gotten to the place where I said I wanted to be, absolutely, those moments are very, very short-lived. They're very fleeting moments. Like you're there, and in a split second, okay, you're like, okay, what's the next thing? You know, that's the curse of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You're always ahead of thinking what else I want to achieve, where else I want to be, where else I want to go and explore.
Yeah.
But the other side of success that I feel that I have much more aligned now and do live is really the sense of alignment of your values. Ultimately, that being success to me now is living in the place, because I think success is beyond where you go, it's how you go. And it's that idea of the journey, the process, because that's 99% of where you live in the pursuit of your dreams, not your dream. It's that part in between. That's the part that you have to be in love with. You have to love every minute of, because that's where we live. It's that 90%, 99% part.
Yeah.
And I think that I definitely am there now where of course there's hard things along the process, but ultimately I still love every moment of it. Like that's what I'm driven by, and that's that alignment of values that I know that I've got a mission, that I'm following, that I'm pursuing that relentlessly, no matter what, and that's what's going to happen. And that's what gives those other things, that's what creates the achievements and the success by society's expectations as a result of it.
I have one more for you. Say we leave the studio and go out in the street there, and say a young entrepreneur, maybe who's aspiring to be something similar maybe to yourself, maybe not exact, but want to be heading that right direction, and they were looking for advice on how to achieve success. What would you say? What would you tell them? Is there one thing you'd say to do or not to do, or?
Great question. I think there's a lot of it that comes down to knowing why you want it. And it's, in a sense, related to those other elements of it, but I think it's knowing why you want it first. More than what you want, know why you want it. That's the important part of it, because that's the part that gives you fulfillment, not success. And those are very different things. You can have success by society standards, which is based around achievements, but that doesn't mean you'll be fulfilled along the way. And that's what I think true success now really is that sense of being fulfilled and being happy. And your happiness is based upon the reality minus your expectations of what it should be. And I think the connection there is ultimately your values and your purpose and why you want it. That's what connects it all. And so that's the part that you have to be enjoying the process, or you'll never get to the place that is this quote unquote success that we have this idyllic picture of.
That's all I have. If there's
Sweet.
anything else you want to mention when you're here, is any?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, man. I mean, what do you think, like, is one of the bigger challenges that the young entrepreneurs face in Northern Ireland, do you think?
Something that I've came across is, and I feel like it's really, really ingrained into like our society, but it's like the opinions of others. I feel like a lot of young people will come up to me and be like, I want to do this, I want to do that, and I say, why don't we do it and things? And they say to me, oh, because, you know, they're going to laugh, or my friend group or my family say you maybe can't. And because that's what I felt at the start. Whenever I started doing this, people said to me, like, I was a quiet guy. I am a quiet guy.
Yeah.
And people said to me, like, is there money involved? Well, no. And it says, well, you're not really a talkative guy, so it's not going to be your thing. But as you said, I was following a path I felt guided by. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing I try to tell others. I'm like, look, like, it's on you essentially at the end of the day. Like, no matter what you do, someone's going to say something about it.
Yeah.
And really drill into what you actually want.
Yeah, very true. And it reminds me of that because obviously I've been away for like 10 years now, all over the place. But I still come back here. I now come back here more frequently than I have in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And I do see that again. And I guess the last thing that I would leave for someone to consider and to remind people is that the cost of doing dwarfs in comparison to wishing you did. Absolutely. And that's a burden that nobody wants to fucking carry.
Yeah. Big time.
So whatever it is, know why you want it and just trust your intuition.
Yeah.
And what I say, keep cooking.
Yeah. No, I like that.